Today, on this episode of This Spiritual Fix, we are talking about communicating with your loved one, all the different tactics that we use to blow up arguments, as well as what you can do to be a better arguer.
Hypnosis, mindfulness, meditation, past life regression, RTT, spirituality.
This Spiritual Fix. Two mystical mamas hacking the self-help game.
With Hannah Fiddler. And Kristina Wiltsey.
Welcome to this fifth episode of This Spiritual Fix, in which today Anna will be talking about how to communicate with your loved one.
It's a book report day.
It is. And let me just set the scene here. Anna, in all of her great organization, is looking at a binder that has printed out pages that are in little plastic holder things. And it's like
Paper protectors.
It's paper protectors.
And they're organized. They're cliff notes of every book I read over the pandemic.
It's so amazing and adorable. And I'm just like so utterly impressed by
and
your
I have
organization.
no Virgo in my chart. That's what's even more
Oh,
impressive.
that's crazy. Well, I can relate to that because I have a very fiery personality, and I'm literally not a single thing of mine is in a fire sign. So I get that.
Well, I have Saturn and Virgo. But anyways, yes. Well, I guess what we could talk a little bit about relationships in the pandemics. You know, the pandemic makes or breaks a relationship. As I've heard of people who need to get a divorce and now talking about divorce. I hear of people ending engagements. I've heard of people just deciding to get married. I've heard of couples getting back together, exes, like divorced exes reuniting, and all sorts of things are coming about during the pandemic. I really think it is, strike when the iron's hot. It's a lot of heat.
And there's also a lot of catalytic energy in the sense of like you get a lot of start or end or start for an end or any of those different things. Like it's all really important in that way. Like even just strange couplings of a relative of mine is renting their house because they're going to be moving away for a while. And they literally have like 4 adults just moving in together because they all lived in separate apartments and they wanted to be in the same house. So they rented a really big house together and it's like friends.
Awesome.
And you're like, okay, cool. That's a different kind of relationship. And it's adult roommate sort of situation, but
Sounds fun to me. That's the best part about college.
right. Isn't it?
It really was the living together part.
Yeah.
I'm the kind of person, when I am in crisis, I will read a lot of books. So before I met my husband, I was involved with my then love of my life, and things didn't work out. And when we broke up, very heartbreaking. What did I do with all that heartbreak? I went to the library and I checked out every single relationship book on the subject. So my favorites were Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, Mars and Venus on a Date, What Are Your 5 Love Languages, Are You the One for Me by Barbara DeAngelis, which I am convinced would have been a bestseller had the cover just not been so damn awful. But a lot of those books really helped me, and I swear they prepared me to be the woman I became and attract the mate that I did. So I am like really grateful to books when it comes to relationships. I really think like we don't get crash courses in love, romance, communication in school. It's things we just don't get at school, in university, whatever. So we can supplement with books. So during the pandemic, when the pandemic started, my husband and I actually had a huge fight right before the pandemic, which got resolved. And so pandemic has actually been really good for our marriage because we resolved some major stuff in February. Mm-hmm. But all the same, I'm like, I don't know what propelled me, but I read like 5 communication books at the beginning of the pandemic. Go ahead.
I remember.
What was it?
You were like, I am so good at researching stuff about myself, and yet I have not actually taken my research skills to figure out how to better my relationship. And then you quoted the same thing. You were like, I remember after I broke up, I like dissected my relationship by learning about all this stuff, but I haven't done it to actually make my current relationship better.
Right. And then the big resolve my husband and I had in February, right before the pandemic, was because I communicated in a totally different way. And I finally got a point across that I had been trying years to get across. I finally got it across, and I'm like, because I just changed my communication. I didn't change the message. I changed my delivery, and it worked. So I'm like, let me figure out, what did I exactly do there? Like, what did I do? Let me try to dissect what happened. Like, how did that actually work?
Yeah.
And I dissected it, and I figured out what I did. And it's in this book report today.
You know, I have to say, I think one of the things that helped that, and I think it's one of the things that's probably helped both of us, is that like we both massively dealt with codependence, like long-standing codependence that we had both been exhibiting, right? Because
right. And codependence is actually not an issue. It's a coping mechanism to the abandonment wound. You heal your abandonment, the codependency falls right off.
Right.
Codependency in a nutshell is all about, I am deathly terrified of being abandoned. I will abandon myself in order to avoid abandonment from others.
Yeah.
And I will then hold you responsible for not saving me.
Yes.
Because I am not saving myself. So codependents usually will like fixate on something. Like the quintessential one is the alcoholic or the drug addict, right? Let me focus on all their problems. Let me externalize everything onto them. I don't have to look at myself because there's a lot of self-abandoning me. I'm not going to deal with my own shit. I'm not going to heal my own shit. I'm going to heal you. And then I'm going to get mad when you don't try to save me.
Yes.
That's codependency in a nutshell. And you don't have to be married to an alcoholic to experience that. Like, I know, like, people pleasing. People pleasing is a huge codependent behavior. Like, let me just be that chipper, extra sweet neighbor and go the extra mile and do this and do that. Like, that's codependency. Like, needing others' approval of you is a codependency thing.
Yeah. Or I'm going to give you a whole bunch of gifts. I'm going to continually gift you with things, and I'm going to continually do this kind of stuff because I need your gratitude. And so I'm going to try and stimulate it in you as opposed to just finding it in myself.
I'm going to swallow my needs and my opinions at the expense of abandoning myself because I get, your validation. And that's more important. That's codependency.
Yeah.
So the book that really opened my eyes up to codependency, phenomenal book. It's called Women Who Love Too Much by Robin Norwood. And she really helped me understand codependency was not about dating an alcoholic. My husband doesn't even drink. It was nothing about that. It was about me abandoning myself and overperforming for everybody. Like, let's watch the Anna show. What's she going to do now? How many jobs is she going to juggle and houses is she going to clean and be that perfect mother and da-da-da-da-da. Like, just fucking, I'm done with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. The communication thing happened before that.
It did happen for that. So today for our book report, I read a lot of relationship books. And when I say read them, I put them on speed audio and listen to them on audio, and I speed them up so I can get through them quicker because I ain't got time for reading a book. That's just me. So the book I'm going to talk about today is called Couple Skills, Making Your Relationship Work by Kim Paleg, Matthew Mckay, and Patrick Fanning. This is a 325-page book. I think it took about 5 hours on audio when I think I put it on 1.25 speed. Mm-hmm. The crux of the book is just basically learning how to be a better listener. And we all hear about active listening, like I feel statements, but there's a lot more to it than just that. So I'm going to talk about the first one, which is the listening blocks that people have. And I love this because we can all recognize the blocks that we have when we're listening to others. The first one is placating. That's quickly giving the other what they want. Rehearsing is you're not actually listening to the other person. Instead, you're coming up in your head what your comeback's going to be. I think we've all done that.
Oh my God. I do that all the time.
Judging, that's not even listening to what they're saying. It's jumping to judgments about what they're saying or who they are. Daydreaming is just tuning the other out completely. Filtering means only hearing what you want to hear to support your belief bias. Mind reading is imagining what they are really trying to say and not hearing what they're actually saying and saying, oh, you mean this. Like that's the mind reading one. Sparring means you just counter whatever they say, meaning they say the sky is blue. Oh, no, it's not. You're just right there sparring, like you're going to give them the opposite.
Yep.
Derailing, which is not letting them finish what they're saying, meaning distracting, derailing, taking the conversation elsewhere, and interrupting, which is the obvious one, which is interrupting. So those are the main listening blocks people have. What do you think are yours, Kristina?
Oh God, like all of them. Mind reading, really bad about that one. Being a psychic intuitive makes it really hard because a lot of the times I can actually mind read, and it's just been happening more and more and more as I've kind of become more and more empty of all of the BS that I've like been carrying. But like, I will definitely have multiple experiences where like I will know about something before it's supposed to happen. Or like a great example, for some God knows reason, in the middle of December, I was just like, I really, really want a piece of jewelry. Like this, like never. I've literally not. I've been like maybe like, oh, that'd be nice to do. Like it was like a 1 on a scale of 1 to 10 of like maybe like a 2 of wanting to get at this piece of jewelry, right? And so all of a sudden it launched up to an 8 in the middle of December, and I was just like, oh my God, I want a piece of jewelry. And I just went searching. I just went searching all around, like looking for different types, like what kind do I want, like planning on it, da 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 da. And then I even mentioned it to Luke, which was crazy because I would never have done that. Turns out, come Christmas Day, he got me a piece of jewelry, and he bought it the day that I started obsessing about jewelry. So I was just reading him from afar because he was searching on the internet for the same things, right? And so like I remember him, he was just like, I was so worried that you had gone and done something and gone and bought something when I had gotten you something anyway, right? So like long story short, it's kind of funny, but you know, it's like that kind of thing happens all the time where it's just like in the air and you can't really hide it. And then it comes across as other things. So mind reading when it comes to listening.
For me, it's probably filtering, only hearing what supports your belief bias. Like the person will say 20 wonderful things, one thing that supports my whatever. I'll focus on that one little thing.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
I can definitely see that. I can see what I can do sometimes is filter to rehearse. Like I filter and rehearse at the same time. Like in the sense of like you're rehearsing what you're saying, and then you're like, you've been rehearsing for so long that the conversation has moved somewhere else, but you're still like trying to figure out the thread of like, how are you going to justify saying the things that you've just been rehearsing for the last 5 minutes?
Right. Well, the point is just recognize what you do so that when you're in an argument, you can just observe that you do that and accept that you do that and hopefully be mindful and stop doing it. Listening tools to cultivate to be an active listener means listening fully, clarifying when you don't understand something, paraphrasing back what you think you heard, and then only then providing feedback. Like, don't be so quick to respond. Like, really hear them out, really listen, say, hey, what I'm hearing is you think blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that reminds me of our friend Robbie's fight rules, right?
Oh, we're going to have a PDF link to a marriage contract.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So go ahead. But
yeah, later on in this, we'll talk about the marriage contract that our shaman Robbie told us about.
Yep.
So there are 3 different exercises they discuss in the book to improve listening. One is taking turns approach, whereas you set a timer, you're going to speak for 5 minutes, I'm going to speak for 5 minutes, and you cannot interrupt anyone unless it's to clarify. You cannot interrupt to judge. So 5 minutes timer, 5, my turn, back and forth. Number 2, which is great, I've never done it, it's called the reversal, where your partner pretends to be you and you pretend to be your partner, and then you debate the topic from that angle. And then you get to play the role of your husband, or your husband gets to play a role of you, and you kind of see things from their point of view. And I really like that one because it really forces you to let go of your ego and like really force yourself into another person's perspective. I've not done it. It just seems like a fabulous idea.
I've done it with myself. So I've done it. I know this sounds really strange, but like for years when I was with when I was like doing goddess retreats up in Indiana, when I lived up there, like we would do all sorts of stuff. Like I would play members of my family who had like said terrible things to me or done whatever.
Pretend to be them.
I pretend to be them. And I've also done it with myself and my higher self.
That's actually called family constellation when you do it with your family members. But
really?
That's another day.
Okay.
Another topic for another day.
Very interesting. Did not know that.
Exercise 3 is you need a script. You write your request on paper and you read it to your partner. This is easier to do to stay on task if it's very like emotional and you get everywhere. So you basically write down in this order. Number 1, the facts, the unbiased facts, such as, you left your dirty dish on the sink. Say, objective fact. Feel statement. I feel taken advantage of when, or I feel blah, 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 without blame. Number 3 is solution. You're requesting like, hey, can you put your dish in the dishwasher? 4 is the self-care alternative, meaning you need to always have a backup plan. Remember that requests and solutions are always freely given. They are not demands. So if your partner's like, nope, I'm not going to do it, you have to have a self-care alternative, such as, okay, I will then put your dishes in the dishwasher, but then I'm going to feel self-care. I'm going to take an extra long shower or whatever it is. That's a great example, but I love the having self-care alternative. That's great for codependence because I think codependents get really wrapped up in not taking care of themselves and to just be like, I really want my spouse to watch the kids tonight so I can go hang out with my friends. Well, the self-care alternative, if he says no, is I'll get a sitter. You got to have a backup plan that doesn't involve your spouse. And I really love that. I think it takes a lot of pressure.
I agree. It also makes it so that you don't have to have because when there's only one alternative and it's either I'll agree to it or I won't, you can get into situations where the partner will just agree to it and then they won't.
Right.
They won't actually do it.
And I like the backup plan idea because it's kind of reminds you that ultimately you don't really need anybody else and you can figure this all out on yourself.
Yep.
And you got your own back.
Yeah.
So anyways, I love the self-care alternative. So reciprocal reinforcement is something they discuss in the book about basically feeding the love tank. So basically figuring out what your spouse's love language is, you discuss it, you make sure that the love tank is being filled. What degree is it being filled? What can I do to fill it? There's a whole chapter just on identifying the love tank and how you can fill it. So for those who aren't familiar with the love tank, and they might or may not go into this in the book, but there's basically 5 languages of love, which is gifts, verbal, acts of service, quality time, touch, and the 6th one they just came out with, I heard, is respecting autonomy, giving people alone time. So basically figuring out what your partner has and giving that to them. Identifying distortions. So distortions are what keep us from fully seeing or accepting our partner. There are 8 distortions. So it's good to know what you do, or you might do more than one of them, or you might do all of them. So tunnel vision is not seeing the good and only seeing the bad, or only seeing things in a certain way. Assumed intent means mind reading. So assuming you know what they are thinking. Magnifying. Oh, I do this one all the time. I just did it. Using superlatives, seeing things as always or never. Mm-hmm. And my husband is a facts-based person, so he hates that one. And I do it a lot. I do a lot of superlatives. Global labeling is belief bias, assuming behaviors based on past beliefs. So you did this because you're selfish, and I know you're selfish because you did X, Y, and Z in the past. So
right,
that's global labeling. Good, bad dichotomies is not seeing that there's a lot of gray in the situation and just labeling certain actions or behavior as good or bad. That's a big injustice injustice wound thing.
Yeah.
Fractured logic means you have this belief that this means that, and it might not mean that for that person. I think that's extremely true for people coming from different cultural backgrounds or even different parts of this country, of the US. You did this, it means that. Well, no, they might have been grown up to be taught this means that, Right. Well, I'm from New Mexico where, for example, every time you throw a dinner party, at the end of the dinner party, all the women get together and help you clean up. Whoever hosted, all the women help clean up. That's just every single dinner party or party I've ever been to growing up was like that. And then I came here to Georgia in the South and no one does it. It took me a really long time to realize that they just don't do that here. It's considered rude. You're intruding on the hostess. I didn't get that. And I was super, super offended that my friends weren't helping me clean up.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm going to help you clean up.
No, you help. You help.
I think Luke actually
your husband
helps.
actually helps. Yeah, your
He's
husband.
the one who helps all the time.
No, but that was I'm from New Mexico. This is Georgia. It's a couple states away, but there was a cultural fractured logic.
Yeah. I mean, that's, definitely. And the same thing in, even just the different tribes. I feel like there's different tribes within, like when I lived in Indiana, when you went to a potluck, it was like everyone went to a potluck, and then you had there was a very, very specific in those potlucks, like no one ever hosted a dinner party. It was always a potluck. You always brought something, and then you always had to bring something that was like quality. And it was like there was all these rules around potlucks there. And down here, like it just doesn't exist in the same way. It was like whatever hippie culture was created in that area of Indiana I lived in was just like there were rules for potlucks, man. Like you needed to know who was the first person to eat. What you always brought silverware with your dish.
Yeah.
Fractured logic.
That was number 6. Number 7 is victim fallacy, meaning you assume responsibility for all the problems. Like, no, it's my fault. That's a very codependent one.
That is a codependent one.
You're going to always assume, you're going to be the one first to apologize. You're going to always assume that all the problems were yours. And then number 8 is the exact opposite of victim fallacy. It's control fallacy, where everything is your partner's fault.
Right.
And I know of a couple, and they both do control fallacy. And it is like they're both pushing a rock against each other because they both believe the other one is completely at fault for the marriage failures. And it'd be a lot better if one of them had victim fallacy and balance it out.
Well, no, but then it just kind of comes to its
No, I'm kidding. But
I mean, and then you can have the opposite. I think my husband and I both have victim fallacy. We both are like, no, it's my fault. No, it's my fault. Like we kind of do that. But what I've noticed in the fact is that I actually use victim fallacy to control the situation, because I'm just like, well, nope, it's all my fault. It's like becomes a manipulation tactic, even though I genuinely kind of don't know if I believe it, but it's just been like a tactic that I've been able to use my whole life to just be like, yep, you're just going to blame me anyway, so I may as well take all the responsibility, and then you can get the fuck off my back.
Great. I think of these distortions, I think I do victim fallacy a lot, where I'll just be like, I just don't want to fight anymore. Let me just assume responsibility for the whole problem, apologize, and then we can move on. Like, I'm just done. And in the end, I forgive it all anyways. Let me just be done with this.
Yeah.
So the book has some great exercises, how to notice which distortions you use over and over again, what kind of feelings come up with which distortions. You can make a diary, make examples of the distortions you use, rewrite your distortions, just change the way you think about them. So again, it's all about awareness. You're aware of what distortions you use. Now that you're aware of them, you can see things differently. Like, what was the one that you said you do the most?
Probably victim fallacy.
Okay. So how could you change that? Or does it need to be changed?
I think self-love is how you change that, honestly. Because, I mean, it has to do with codependence, and it has to do with, like, this whole idea of, like, actually it's worth having the argument, and it's worth, like if you're going to have the argument, then if you're going to go into battle, choose your battle. And if you're not, then you need to forgive it, and you need to be okay with that.
Right. And I think for me, my main one is magnifying. So that's using superlatives and seeing things as always and never.
Yeah.
And I think for me, because that's a big trigger for my husband, because he's a facts person, it's just to remember that, like, the feeling that I feel in the moment of always and never, like when I use words for effect, I need to remember that just because I feel that way, it doesn't make it true. Because sometimes it feels like you always do this, but that's really not the facts. Like, I probably need to, like, become a little more factual and a little less emotional. I don't know if I can really do that in the moment, but
well, but I also think that like genuinely, like when you're saying that, I can just see that, like, so much of the codependent part, or so much of the argument part of you, comes from this, like, little girl. And, like, the little girl, I feel like in a lot of us, and this is obviously not in the book, but I kind of feel like a lot of us go into a certain age where we learn to fight. Right? Like, we go back to the age where we learn to fight. And so for me, I was always blamed for everything. Again, I'm
in your story, in your world.
In my story, in my world, I was always blamed for everything. So I go into the victim fallacy. And so I turn into, like, a 11-year-old girl, and I'm like, okay, yeah, fine. It's all my fucking fault. Like, blah, 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 blah. Like, I probably didn't say it like that when I was 11, but, and then for you, I can see how, as a kid, like, when you learn to fight, like, stuff is always and never. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it becomes that extreme. Like, my 6-year-old does that. My 6-year-old is continuing, you never let us do anything. And I'm like, what? Like, how is that even possible?
I wonder if there's like developmental milestones that show you where you got stuck according to what distortion you use. So I'm stuck in being a 6-year-old where everything feels always or never.
Yeah, no, seriously, that's totally what it feels like. That's like when you're saying that, I'm like, I feel like we're all getting stuck at a certain age when, you know, we weren't given another method for arguing.
Right.
And it's really, really hard because I've tried to teach my daughter, like, but she's obviously at a developmental milestone. And so when she grows up, hopefully I can go back and be like, okay, this is the way to best argue. I'm not going to teach you not to argue. I'm going to say, this is how you do. And this is how you accept that you're angry and that you need to discuss it because your feelings are valid, but you also need to know how to fight fairly.
Right. And know your audience.
Yeah.
So those distortions are a good one. So we're going to talk next about, the book talks about negotiating. So in negotiating, you have 5 different stages: preparation, discussion, proposals and counter proposals. That's another one. Disagreement, and then agreement. So there are 8 principles to negotiation. The first one is know that conflict is inevitable. 2 is no name calling or threats. 3, 2 parties will have legitimate but opposing interests. So just knowing the other person's argument is legitimate and valid too.
Yep.
4 is separate your feelings. 5 is focus on your interests and not your position. Meaning, don't be like, I have to win this, so I'm going to not budge because I've got to win it. Like, no, focus on the end goal. Like, what's the outcome you're wanting, right? Focus on that and not like who's the winner and the loser in the negotiation.
Yep.
Number 6 is seek mutually beneficial results. 7, be flexible. And 8, be persistent. You may need to try out the solution and revisit it again and again. Well, I really like that one because I think we all have a little bit of optimism and we think like the first time we negotiate something, it's going to work. And we have to be realistic and realize, you know what? It might not work. You might have to try it 5 different times, 5 different ways till you guys find the balance that works for you.
Yeah. The thing I love about that, and I remember this was such an interesting thing because I feel like you and Eric's relationship gives me so much insight into what I do and don't do with Luke because we just know each other's relationship so well. And like, I remember you told me that like you negotiated something with Eric like 10 years ago.
Right.
About the distribution of
labor in the home.
Right. And you only just renegotiated
We
that.
only renegotiated after having 2 children.
One of them is what, 8?
She's 8. So we renegotiated when she was 7. So like I basically renegotiated the terms of our distribution of household labor after realizing that having 2 children like quadrupled my labor. But I didn't renegotiate the terms because I don't know. I guess I was just trapped in my codependent, overachieving, overperforming mode. I don't know what it was, but we finally had the conversation. We renegotiated the terms of our distribution of labor, and it's all great now.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that like what I noticed for myself is that Luke and I are continually renegotiating.
You guys are always negotiating stuff.
We're always renegotiating. But what I recognize is that in the Enneagram, he's a 5, which means that he's like a research analyst, right? He's also in human design. He's a quadruple split definition, which is like incredibly rare. Less than 1% of the population has quadruple split. Like you literally can't have it unless you have like, it's really, really rare. Anyway. So all of this comes down to the fact that he literally needs a negotiation written down in ink. So I was making all these negotiations and I was thinking that I was creating contracts and he literally had no idea.
So he would go against them, annoying you, but it was simply because to him, he needed them written down.
Exactly.
So you write them down now.
Yeah.
Okay. There you go.
Yeah.
All right. We're moving on. We're going to skip the part about problem solving. We're going to go to conflict resolution. There are 8 adversive strategies to resolving conflict. So you never want to use coercion, shame, or guilt to get the other to do what you want them to do. That's a given.
Yeah.
Let's just start there.
Okay. That means never saying, I mean, it's funny because we actually probably do it to our kids all the time.
You use shame, coercion, or guilt?
Mm-hmm.
Probably.
Yeah. So
I try not to. I'm probably doing it all the time.
I think I'm doing it all the time because I don't know. I don't
do
know
coercion a lot.
Coercion is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I don't do shame and guilt so much, but coercion.
I think when I was more
Do
codependent,
this, you'll get a candy.
that's exactly it. Bribing.
Bribing.
And I know that I used to do, when I was more codependent in my particular flavor of codependence, I definitely did more guilt. You hurt me. Are you actually going to say hi? That really hurt. How could you, like I would actually do that. But yeah, coercion. Whew.
Yeah. Okay, so these are the 8 aversive strategies. We'll talk about motherhood another episode.
I know. I was like, that's like a whole different
another
topic.
Pandora's box. 8 aversive strategies. Number 1, discounting, which is making your partner's needs unimportant. 2, withdrawal or abandonment. Do what I said or I'm leaving. Number 3, threats. Do this or I won't do that. 4, blaming. You make your need into the other person's fault. Mm-hmm. Number 5, belittling, denigrating, which is obvious.
Yep.
6 is guilt tripping, again, obvious. Mm-hmm. Derailing, which means switching the conversation focus. And 8, taking away, meaning you will withdraw some sort of support or affection.
Right.
And I think that's the 8th one. Like, I don't do that. I'm not a taker awayer. Like, I'm pretty affectionate, regardless if I'm mad or not mad. Like, I pretty much stay consistent in my affections, in my acts of service, all that. But I know that that's a big one for men because I hear that from my friends' husbands, or my friends telling me about their husbands, or even their husbands telling me that like they got in a hard argument and now the wife is like, I think men are really, what I mean to say is I think men are really sensitive to the taking away, like when women pull away support and affection.
Yeah.
But it's also like, how do they not if they're upset? I don't do it just because I don't know. I think I'm a codependent person, so I'm going to overperform. But I think it's a very natural thing to do.
I do. And I actually once heard a joke that every single man's language of love is touch. Like that, just across the board. Like, doesn't even matter. Like, you want to claim to see other things, it's actually touch. That was a joke, but like, that was a meme of some sort. But I think that I definitely do. I definitely withdraw because it's the only way. It's like, it's just another power play. Like, it's just another way of doing it. And it was always very effective growing up in my like adolescent relationships to do that. And it was like the only thing I knew how to do, but it also hurt me so much that it was like really hard to like, it felt like a self-punishment as well as a punishment of the other person.
Right.
Yeah.
When I first started reading this book, it was around the same time I was doing the Mckay course about blame. I think mine was number 4, blaming, where I make my needs the other person's fault. And I had this huge epiphany about blame and not blaming anyone and like taking ownership of my own needs. I don't believe I do that anymore, but that was definitely my go-to adversive strategy for conflict resolution, was like blaming, like this isn't working and therefore it's your fault and not my fault and I'm the victim, and blame.
Yeah. I'm really very versatile in all of these.
I can do a lot of adversive strategies.
I have a wide range of experiences of being manipulative.
I'm going to like skip through some of this other stuff. One of them, these are just different ways to deal with your partner's anger. There's one that I like a lot, which I'm going to talk about, which is called the timeout, which I feel like is really wonderful, which is you come up with a safe word or a safe phrase. And when that person says it in the conversation, it means the conversation's over. Like you hear this old saying, never go to bed angry. Bullshit. Go to bed angry, digest it, think on it, work it out when you're better, especially if you're a projector like I am, my astrological code. I need 3 days to really process something. And if I'm trying to resolve conflict on that same day, it's just a bad recipe. Like, let me give myself some time. Go to bed angry. It's okay.
No, that's a really, really good point. A human design, if you're emotional, you have an emotional authority, it takes you 2 to 3 days to actually figure out what you're doing and to make a decision. So it's like, if you do try and process something before that and actually try and address something, you're going to be all over the place. Like whatever you are feeling at that moment is going to determine how you communicate, or the facts that you present, or your argument that you present. And if you wait for the 3 days, then you can come back and you can actually say, this is what it is. This is what actually bothers me. And then you don't risk causing collateral damage in the meantime while you're actually making up your mind.
Right. And then what I really like about the safe word is So this is not from this book, it's from a different book, but it says that women can deal with stress better than men, and it's just because of the way we're adapted. Like, in order to breastfeed, we have to have oxytocin in our bodies, which means we have to be relaxed, which means that when we're in stress, we still need to be calm, because otherwise we won't lactate, and our human species is going to die without that. You know, we're going back to caveman times. Similarly, men were wired that if they saw they're hunting or they are in, you know, being chased, they've got to like be able to be on it. So they noticed that after arguments and fights, like if you check a woman's blood pressure versus a man, it'll go right back down low right after the argument. And the man's is just going to keep going and going and going. They just process stress differently. And so women need to be very aware and mindful of it, that when they shut down, they like physiologically need to shut down. Like their blood pressure is through the roof. Their heart rate is through the roof. So the safe word is great. So in our family, our safe word is I'm feeling vulnerable. You can say I'm feeling overwhelmed, but basically when you're saying I'm feeling vulnerable, it's just like time out, no matter where the conversation is, wherever the argument is, it's escalated, like time to give a break. So if I say, or my husband says, I'm feeling vulnerable right now, it's time to be like, we're done. There's no cheese at the end of this tunnel. Like this conversation is just going to get worse and worse and worse. So they're calling a timeout, and I love the timeout. So we're going to talk about the marriage contract now.
And you have those notes, right? So we can put them in the show notes?
Yeah, let me find the marriage contract.
Okay. The marriage contract, as a background, came from our dear friend Robbie, who has one of the best models for a relationship that I think I've ever seen. You know, she's a shaman and she helps women with their spiritual journeys, and he's a CEO coach. So there are literally two people who are in the prime opportunity to know about their inner states as well as the best way to communicate. And as a result, like I'm sure that Anna and I both are continually kind of like looking at their relationship and being like, oh, we need to do that in ours, because I feel like they treat their relationship like a profession. Like it is efficient, and they stick to the rules, and like there's no amateur playing around in their relationship. You never have there's no low blows. There's nothing like that. They're both
bringing
adults.
their all.
They're bringing their all, and they're both 100% adults. Of course, that's an outside perspective, but yeah.
They've done a lot of inner child work, I guess. Well, so Robbie has given us, and we will share it in the PDF, marriage contracts, aka rules of engagement. She's got 5 rules that she lives by, and I think they are great. Mm-hmm. And you can add or take away from your contract as you wish. But I feel like this would have been a great thing to have when we got married, like just knowing how are we going to argue. Mm-hmm. So number 1 is the angry person gets the floor until they're done. Meaning, if you're angry, you get to talk and talk and talk till you say it's the other person's turn. Number 2, no name calling, yelling, or character assassination. Number 3, no using up past behaviors or arguments. Like if it didn't happen in the last 24 hours, you cannot talk about it.
Yeah, because you've already resolved it, seemingly, right?
And Number 4, this was my own that I threw in. It wasn't in her original, which was no using friends or family as evidence to back your point up. Like I really don't like when you're having an argument with someone and they go, well, I think you're like this. And even so-and-so agrees. Like don't bring other people into the argument. Yeah. Like that's a low blow. I really don't like that. So yeah.
It's so destructive, because then you start to question all of your relationships, and
then you question the person who's agreeing with your partner about what a horrible person you are.
Yeah, it's a massive trigger for me, especially when someone uses someone who I revere or a teacher of mine, and they use that as like, oh, well, this person said this about this, and like, or about you. And then you're just like, you literally just destroyed one of my relationships. Right. How could you do that?
Right. Like I'm never going to feel comfortable around that person again until I do some deep ho'oponopono work, because I feel weird now.
Yeah.
And number 5 is you have 24 hours to bring up something that bothered you. And if you don't address it in 24 hours, you lose the right to bitch about it. That, to just explain that one, like let's say you and your partner get in an argument on Monday. You have got until Tuesday to bring it up. And if you don't, you've got to just suck it up and you got to make peace with it on your own. Now, if you bring it up on Tuesday and that person's like, I've got a deadline, we cannot resolve this till Friday, that's fine. Like you can set a future date to resolve it. but you got to bring it up that it bothered you within 24 hours.
Yeah.
I love that time limit one because basically all the crap in the past, when you sign this contract, you're basically agreeing to forgive and forget everything that's happened up until today.
It's like Jesus. He died and forgave all your past sins. Anyway, but I think that's really important too for this whole idea of like having emotional authority. If you look in human design, like if you take 2 to 3 days to decide something, you need to flag it within the first 24 hours and then don't have the conversation for 2 to 3 days after that. So be like, yo, I'm really pissed off that you did this thing and I'm going to talk to you about it on Thursday.
Yeah, that's very mature.
Yeah. It is. It's the best way to follow your authority. It's the best way to be able to make sure that you're actually doing it. And it really, I have to say, like, beyond marriages, I kind of hope that, like, it's a great thing to do for families as well. Like anybody, if you have a close relationship or if you have a volatile relationship with anyone who's close to your family, like it's a really good idea to do this because otherwise what will end up happening is especially if you don't have the 24-hour rule, like what will happen is that like no one will bother to actually do it. Like no one will bother to bring it up again. And then it'll just accumulate and it'll snowball and it'll snowball and it'll snowball. And then eventually you just get like pummeled by this massive mile-high snowball and you don't know what hits you because you never bothered to communicate properly and follow the rules of the other of settling it, right?
Right. And these tools work for, it doesn't have to be romance. Like my sibling and I, we had a falling out of sorts and we did the timer thing where we took turns and like 3 minutes she talked, 3 minutes I talked. We just went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And when it was done, we were done. We were like done. And it was so nice to just say what you needed to say and not be interrupted. That was a really good one.
Yeah.
So it could be anyone.
It is. I would agree that especially if you're dealing with someone who feels as if they haven't been heard and that their feelings aren't valid, like this is going to be a very, very powerful tool for them. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And the irony of all of this is like I read these books. I don't think my husband and I had more than 1 or 2 fights the whole pandemic. So I haven't really gotten a chance to put it into practice. Mm-hmm. But just talking about it today reminds me of them. So when we do inevitably have an argument, like hopefully we can be better at it.
Awesome.
All right.
Good work.
See you later.
Thank you, Anna.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of This Spiritual Fix. Please be sure to subscribe and leave a review for us on anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. Make sure also to maybe share this episode with someone who you know may be having trouble with communication. We really appreciate your continued support, and we hope that you have an awesome day. Hi, Kristina, co-host of This Spiritual Fix. Has listening to our podcast stirred up something for you with the Primal Wounds? The good news is you have access, and that is the first step to transforming these wounds. We created support packages to help you through this process, and they're available on our website, www.thisspiritualfix.com. These packages were designed by Anna and I, combining techniques and hacks from our own experience working through our own wounds. Each packet contains a workbook and 2 meditations, one about forgiving those who have wounded you, including yourself, and one about reprogramming old beliefs. You can buy an individual support package, or for those next level processors, all 5 packets: abandonment, injustice, rejection, betrayal, and humiliation. Available on our website and our shop.